Hi, so I'd just like to start off just by talking a little bit about the Open Data Institute, who we are. We just hit our 5th anniversary this year. Congratulations us. Not many startups make it to 5 years. We've made it to 5 years. So we were founded 5 years ago by Sir Tim Berners-Lee and Nigel Shadbolt with the goal of getting knowledge to everyone. We've been refining that mission. At the moment, we think that one of the best things we can do to get knowledge to everyone, to build a good world with data, is to build a strong, fair and sustainable data economy where data gets to people who need it. There's lots of people out there who want data, who know how to use it like yourselves. Often you can't get hold of that data, and that's kind of the biggest problem. How do we get it to people who can use it to build things that make the world a better place? That's very much where we focus ourselves. And when we do that work, we're a small team, about 35 people. I'm about the 3rd oldest, and we say we're going to try and change the world, because it's nice to have a big ambition, but we work with a wide network of people. So we work with, there's a peer network of nodes in 19 different countries around the world, and nodes in all 4 UK nations, various places, all working with a similar mission, all working to try and achieve the same kind of goals. And a member network of over 1,000 people and organisations. Again, working together to say, how do we get data to where it's needed so people can get it used? And when you have those networks, just like this society, you can achieve great things. Now, one of the things we find is analogies for data. The most popular one is data is oil, which I'm sure everyone's heard. And I get really grumpy when I hear things like, it's rare I get grumpy, I'm normally quite a cheerful person. But data is oil, it's a very different way data is. It thinks of like something that's extractive, something I burn up when I use it, something I need to fight over as a precious resource. And data's got very different qualities. It works at its best when I can use it many, many times. Many people can use it at the same time. It works best when I connect it together with lots of different things. So we start to say data is just like roads. Roads help us get to a location. Data helps us make a decision. And it's those decisions that are the really important and valuable things. And then there's some of the qualities of roads. You start to find that roads are a form of infrastructure. We learned how to strategically plan roads. It took us centuries. Look at the Roman roads, they're still there, some of them. So maybe it took us millennia to learn how to build roads and do it well. And maybe that's the kind of timescale we're looking at for data. But we learned how to make it work for the good of everyone, for the good of society. And really that's kind of what we need to be doing for data. How do we make those long-term decisions? We're fixing short-term problems, but how do we learn how to make good long-term decisions? So that's one we play around with quite a lot. And that is a picture from a holiday I once took, which is now stuck in our slide deck for the last 2 years. And when we look at that, at the data that helps us make a decision, we find that actually there's lots of different types of data. And people talk about all these complex words, big data, smart data, small data, thicker data. I hear all these terms coming out. And actually it's all just data, really. It just depends whether I can process it. The important thing is who can access it. How is it licensed? So we tend to think about data on a spectrum, from closed to shared to open. Closed data is just held within your organisation, or in that world of my data that was mentioned earlier. In some of the talks, it might be data I've just got on a device, only I can get to. Shared data is things I share between academic institutions, or between government departments, or between commercial operators. And then open data, data anyone can access, use and share. So often we're about putting data at the right point on that spectrum, making a conscious decision about where data is to create the right effect is very important. Again, it's just like the roads. And you can see with that closed, shared and open, you have analogies on roads. You have roads that are locked, you have roads that are behind toll gates or cattle grids. Researchers are like sheep, we can just get over them. Or open roads, big highways anyone can use. So those analogies like to players and help us understand and make more better decisions about data. And the other part of that as well, I suppose, is the rights and responsibilities that come with it. When we put data in certain places, we have a responsibility. Just like with a road, we have a responsibility. It's not always about ownership, it's about who has the rights, who has the responsibility. And this is one of our busier slides. So people might have heard of the Semantic Web. Anyone in the room heard of the Semantic Web? I think Tim Berners-Lee is still sorry. So often we tend to talk about the web. We talk about the World Wide Web with the world of documents. There's billions of documents out there on the web. That's been built over 25, 30 years, or 25 years. That's been growing. If you look at data, through the same analogy, we're building a web of data. We just don't realise it as such. We're in the very early days of it. It's going to be much larger scale than the web of documents. All of the devices we have in our homes that are connected to the internet, all of the devices roaming the streets, all the services we use, the drones, the cars, the satellites that are taking the pictures of the oil tanks. Earlier on, all of those things are publishing data to the web, closed, shared or open, but they're publishing data, and that data is being linked together. We're in the very early stages of this revolution, and it's changing our societies. We can see it. It's why that debate about ethics has become more important as people have realised some of the effects. They're seeing an impact on them. But that's kind of the goal we're all heading towards. And it is important to think about this in terms of decades and centuries, not in terms of years and months. But against that big backdrop, at important times, we find ourselves here in the UK kind of befuddled up with other obsessions. So at the moment we're going through Brexit, which we voted for last year, and that's tangling up the civil service and the government, working out how do we change, how do we preserve things through Brexit, not just make them better, but how do we actually preserve the status quo even as we move out from the EU trading bloc into the UK on its own on the ocean. And that's tangling up a lot of things. How do we do that? How do we make sure we can do that at the same time as we have this huge technology and data revolution going on? And then we have elections. So we had a surprise election just a few months ago while organisations like ourselves and many others have been pressuring governments to say there's things we need to do. We need a data ethics commission. We need to sort out free flow of data. We have the Digital Economy Act. We've given better use of data for some statistical and academic research. It's gone through, but it's not been fully implemented. And then we have another election, which obviously has led to a hung parliament, which could be another election in days or weeks or months. Who knows, but it feels like there could be something else on the way. So we're all facing challenges at this point, especially in the UK, when other countries are forging on, and we need to work out how we can get things done. How do we make things better? How do we work when we don't have the bits of central government? So we still have local government, we still have businesses, but we need to make sure we carry on doing things despite those challenges. So a lot of it is about, so this is where, as I say, we've hit our 5-year anniversary. We've been looking back at the lessons we've learned. We're often described as the open data movement. I think the very first event I did for open data, for the Open Data Institute, I joined it about 18 months ago. Somebody asked me, was I going to be preaching from stage? I was like, not quite. It's not my style, but if you want to make me to preach, and I will happily do it. But we had to look back at the lessons and say, are there things we were doing wrong? Are there things we could have done better? And I suppose that's one of the great things I liked about the summit today. I've been sitting in the back there taking notes and working on some things, listening again to lots of people sharing their ideas. Because again, when we're going through this kind of change, sharing ideas, being open, learning with each other, learning as a network is really important. It's how we can all make progress. And some of the things we've learned is the open data movement for a while almost seemed to see open data was the goal, rather than open data was a tool to achieve change. The goal for me isn't a website with lots of links to data sets on it. The goal for me is when someone's using that data to achieve some good and achieve a better outcome. We saw a focus on open by default rather than strategic open data. So rather than focusing on publishing lots of data, let's focus on publishing the data sets that make a change, make a difference. I'll come with some examples in a second. And there was also a impact through serendipitous reuse. People was almost like the field of dreams. People would say, if I publish data, they will come and something will happen. And actually what we needed to do was a bit more stimulate people, support them to get things done. And to make sure we focus that towards areas where where the market isn't going to support the use of the data, but actually support some areas where the market won't serve it. We have to make sure it reaches everyone, so we get the benefits to as many people as possible. So we've been looking at this and saying there are gaps to make sure we get to use data for decision making. We need to be focusing on infrastructure, skills, innovation. Often, again, the data world, it can feel like a world full of technology. That's only a really small part of it. As far as we can tell, we've got three expert technologists in the team. That's 10% of the team. You know, for the rest of us, many of the rest of us are working in these other areas. We're training people with skills. We're training both people like yourselves, but we're also training the general public to say, understand and join in the data debate, so we get a more informed debate. Working on evidence so we can convince more people. Or working on evidence to say, this doesn't work in this context, can we please stop doing this? And incubating startups, businesses, and working with small public sector organisations to say, okay, let's help you get the skills and work there. Because again, otherwise it just becomes something, data becomes something that's only done by big organisations with lots of resources. So we work a lot at the moment on data as a tool. So this is where we've developed these little cards. We print them off because sometimes it's easier. People like to play with things. And what we did for here was we looked at the world of policy. We looked at the areas of policy where data had been used to create impact, but it wasn't being used enough, because people didn't know it could do something. So we wrote down a set of policy-framed questions or outcomes they wanted. You want to enable commercial exploitation. You want to break up a monopoly. And all of these cards say, here's how you can do that using data. Here's a way data has been used to help with that problem before, to encourage more people to think of these new ideas and new ways of doing things. You can combine together some of these cards to say, here's a way of tackling the housing market by opening up data so land suppliers know, so public authorities know where land could be built, where a developer knows they could build another development unit similar to one they built in another part of the country because it has the same characteristics. But it's very important for us to make sure we frame these in the language of policymakers rather than the language of data people. There's strategic open data. So we worked on the open banking standard about a year and a half ago. One of the things I worked on. The entire UK retail banking sector, about 300 different organisations, came together and said, we're willing to work together and say, how can we use data to improve our industry and make it work for customers? That was great. We got them all to work in Google Docs as well. That was a bit scary. Some of them had to go outside their buildings and use phones because they just couldn't get to it. But we got them all to sign up and say, we're willing to do this. We're willing to move together as an industry and open up data. So they've committed to open up information on branch locations, cash machines, their product ranges as open data, but also to put APIs around customer data. So customers could then give people access to their data in certain conditions, with the open data being used to interpret it. And that way it improves the banking market. But there's a whole host of other factors that will kick in. Now, as a researcher, you could then, when this is implemented early next year, you could go to bank customers and say, can you give me access to your bank data so I can do some research on financial inclusion in Monmouthshire? And you could get a cohort of people together and start to see how you can do that research, because we've given them more control over the data held in the bank accounts. And then impact by design. There's an initiative that's just started this year called Open Active, where the problem that was set by Sport England was we want to get more of England physically active. That was the goal. And what we've come up with from lots of research, which they'd helped do with as to why people were making decisions not to be active, was a lot of the thing is people couldn't find opportunities. They didn't know where the nearest yoga class was or whether there was a gym on the way home from work, because they couldn't find those things. It was easier to book a holiday in Benidorm than it was to book a badminton court, which seems kind of strange. So we're just helping that entire sector open up their data and then create services that will use it and then target those services towards people like me who aren't that physically active. So using that data to create impact by design. But those are the, I suppose, thinking back to some of the panels I heard earlier, lots of the positive things about data. But we also have all the negative possibilities and negative impacts that are happening right now. There's gaps around trust in data. And if we lack trust, it means that lots of the work all of us are doing could get pushed back. People could choose to start withholding data. And we kind of think of these things in 3 key gaps we need to solve for trust. One is ethics. I suppose we disagree slightly with some of the panels I've heard today. I think it's too early to say what our principles are for ethical use of data. I think society doesn't quite know. I think there's different views in the UK, there's different views in many other countries, certainly, from the UK. So what we've been working on is a canvas to say, here's how to debate the issues around data ethics. Here's how to understand the adverse impacts that could be created for a particular use of data in a particular context. And ideally, just like a privacy impact assessment now, open up those debates. This is actually just a demo version. We've been user testing at the moment. So we've been testing this with people and then saying, okay, give us feedback. How can we make this work better for you? So we're just cutting it apart and reshaping it at the moment. Another one's engagement. This is a picture from one of my favourite TV shows, Parks and Recreation, of a town hall debate of people passionately debating. I think in this case it's probably the location of a park or something, or whether there should be a swing and slide set in there. But we have those debates in our local communities. We're not having those debates about data. Or when we do, there's too few people in the room. It's just the experts, rather than the wider population, rather than the different segments of society. We want to get to a place where millions of people can engage in the debates over data, not just the policy debates, but choosing who to share their data with by getting that greater data literacy. And then we have the challenge of equity, which is probably the biggest challenge. At the moment, huge sums of data, huge stores of it are held away, whether it be within government departments, who are unsure whether they can share it or not, but also in the private sector, incredibly valuable data sets that could be used for research, to build better services, or to create more competitive markets. And we need to look at how we can make sure that everyone is benefiting from that data, how we break it up, and how we make sure we get an equitable outcome. That's the way we start to drive towards the kind of words that Tim Berners-Lee was saying at the Olympics of "this is for everyone," what our own slogan of "knowledge is for everyone." So those are some of the things we've been finding, the lessons we've learned over the last 5 years, and some of the things we'll be working on over the next few years. And now, questions.